שאלה ראשונה שהיא hogy először is mindenek előtt tegye meg, hogy a Heti TV és a Magyar Rádió nézőit üdvözli, és elmondja, hogy mi az ő feladata.
So if you may, for the first thing, just to the viewers of the television channel and the listeners of the radio, if you can, in a few words, tell us what you actually do.
Okay. So the European Commission, following a colloquium on anti-Semitism last year, excuse me, shall we start again? Because I look at you
look
probably,
look at you probably. No,
are you going to record?
Look at you, I am nice.
Yeah, but you're going to record on this camera too, then...
Then it will go through the editing and it will officially be okay. It's supposed to be okay.
De amit mondott, az fog benne maradni.
Okay, all right.
De ezzel veszed fel, ez volt a kérdés. De ezzel a kamerát. Okay. Yes.
So, yes, the European Commission, following a colloquium last year in October, appointed in December last year two coordinators. One is on combating anti-Semitism and the other one on combating anti-Muslim hatred. And my main role for the last year has been to talk to the Jewish communities across Europe, to know what are actually the issues, to see also how different the issues are for the various Jewish minorities and Jewish communities in the member states, and to see how this can be fed into the policy-making process on the one side, but also how the political level needs to be informed and can be informed and be alerted of the situation of anti-Semitism in Europe today, because we see that also in terms of numbers, but also in terms of just simply perception, the situation for Jews in Europe is getting worse, and there is a perceived fear, is a perceived loneliness also of not being heard properly by governments and by the European institutions. And so this is my main role, to really make sure that the Jewish voice is heard.
Jó. Következő kérdés.
Egyszer már elfogadtak egy határozatot a 28 országból 13-an a gyűlöletbeszéd ellen. Hogy tudja például ezt kommunikálni, és mit tud azért tenni, hogy a többiek is elfogadják ezt?
You did mention that a specific resolution against hate speech and hate crime was accepted by 13 of the member states. So what, for example, can you do? What are the tools in your possession to make the other ones implement the same resolutions as well?
So, to explain, this is legislation. This legislation was adopted by all member states, and all of them have to implement it. With view to the Holocaust denial inciting to violence, only at the moment 13 have correctly transposed this part of this legislation. It doesn't mean that the others have nothing. But in order to have things correctly transposed, we work with member states to make sure that all aspects of this legislation, a framework decision on racism and xenophobia, is transposed into national law, and that it is applied. Because legislation is one thing, but if it's not properly applied and enforced afterwards, it doesn't help. So we are in this process now to make sure that member states not only transpose, but also apply it. This means also, for example, to train their judges, their prosecutors, their police, to make sure that the administration and the actors, the state actors, are aware of this legislation.
Milyen kommunikációs lehetőségei vannak, hisz a másik oldalon az ellenfél a szólásszabadság. Például itt van az Amerikai Egyesült Államok, aki ugyan nem az Európai Unió tagja, de ők például a gyűlölet elleni beszédet, ha onnét sugározzák Európába, azt nem zárják le.
So the question is, what are the communication tools that you're actually able to use against combating, for example, hate crime? Because we know on the other side there is a question of freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. For example, if a website that contains hate crime that tries to incite violence, if it is from the United States, if the website is operated in the United States, there's really nothing you can do about it here. So what kind of communication tools do you even possess that you can actually use?
Well, actually this is not true, because we implemented and agreed with the big IT companies to a voluntary approach for them to look according to European legislation. So in European legislation we have that a phrase that hate speech inciting to violence is criminalized. We have a limit to freedom of speech that is different from the US. And the IT companies agreed that within 24 hours they will revise and, if necessary, remove all illegal hate speech flagged to them by trusted flaggers or by users. So this is something that we are at the moment implementing we are seeing how the developments are going. We work closely with NGOs who have the habit to monitor hate speech online, and we will see probably by the end of the year whether anything has changed.
Mega. And what are the communication regarding other matters when you try to address other member states or lawmakers or legislation? What can you actually use? Are you able to use marketing or PR or television channels or radio channels? What is it that you actually accomplish your work with?
Well, I mean, obviously we have the possibility to talk to the media, you know, and to usually when I visit Jewish communities, then I also talk to the media in that member state, for example. But it's also the funding that is very important on European level. We have several different programs, for example, tackling the prevention of radicalization, tackling education, looking at how the Shoah can be taught in a better way, teaching the teachers, all these kind of different projects that are funded by EU money and implemented by NGOs or by member states in order to transpose the policies that we agree here on European level.
Utolsó kérdésem, ami nem egy politikál korrekt, de mégis föl kell, hogy tegyem. Én régen azt hittem, hogy antiszemiták, anti-izraeliek, antik csak szélső jobboldaliak lehetnek. De most nekem úgy tűnik, minthogyha mindenféle szélsőségekről is lennének bojkotok, antiszemitizmus, anti-izraelizmus, akár éppen a szélső baloldalról is.
Very last question. Apologies. Yes, very last question. In a more traditional sense, anti-Semitism was always a question of the extreme right. And it is becoming, of course, less and less politically correct, but we do see that anti-Semitism does not only belong to the extreme right, but we can see all types of extremists, whether it's the extreme left or Salafist Islam or Jihad Islam, that is going around. Mi volt a kérdés maga?
Az volt a kérdés, hogy elismerje, vagy tud-e arról, hogy ma már a szélső baloldal is magáénak tudja ezeket a szélsőséges dolgokat.
What are your views on the matter that today it is not only a question of the extreme right, but we see it transposing or sliding into questions of the extreme left or even central or green parties?
But we have made very clear that we tackle anti-Semitism wherever it occurs, in all the different forms. We are aware of, the extremes, but also about the fact that some anti-Semitic speech has just creeped into mainstream to some extent. You know, so we are very much aware of this, and again, we act when there is a legal basis, but there's something between the possibility to immediately go to court for member states, and it's the member states who need to take perpetrators to court, and on the other side, political awareness raising and making sure that people understand what anti-Semitism nowadays actually is about. And so, for example, we do this within the European Commission, also for our own staff, but also externally, again, by financing organizations that can explain the different forms of anti-Semitism and how it can be detected and then also dismantled and fought.
Lassan ön egy éve ebbe a beosztásba van. Most én mégis arra kérem, hogy több százezren fogják ezt a rövid interjút látni, Európán és Európán kívül 3 mondatba mondja meg a nézőknek, hogy mit tegyenek, hogy ez a világ szebb legyen.
Okay, so we know you've only been doing this for a year now, and this interview, both on TV and in radio, will reach several 100,000 people, both in Europe and mainly outside of Europe as well. If you can, just in 2 or 3 sentences, what should people on an individual level do in order to combat anti-Semitism or anti-Israeli feelings?
I think you need to stand up every time you see it. You know, it's a question of civil courage. It's not easy, and the problem is that people who speak up against anti-Semitism can very easily become a target themselves. But I think it's a question, and it has always been in history, a question of civil courage to know what is right and then to also do it. And I think this challenge remains valid for every human being in all the various forms. It's not just about anti-Semitism, but unfortunately it often starts with the Jews and then it doesn't stop there. So when we stand up against anti-Semitism, we also stand up for our values, for our democracy, for equality, for non-discrimination. And I think it is this understanding that we should develop, that standing up for anti-Semitism is also standing up for our values.
Köszönjük szépen.